So I wanted to point out this letter from President Lincoln to Alexander Stevens. Basically, his kind of response, and I think I looked at this in a couple of the classes, but let me point this out again. Do the people of the South really entertain the fears that a Republican administration would directly or indirectly interfere with their slaves or with them about their slaves? If they do, I wish to assure you, as once a friend and still, I hope, not an enemy, that there is no cause for such fears. The South would be in no more danger in this respect than it was in the days of Washington. I suppose, however, this does not meet the case. You think slavery is right and not to be extended, while we think it is wrong and not to be restricted. That, I suppose, is the rub. It is certainly the only substantial difference between us. Now, I don't know that it's the only substantial difference, but I do think it's very interesting to recognize that as early as December 22nd, you have Abraham Lincoln really trying to promise that he is not trying to tear apart the Union. And he sends this specifically to Alexander Stevens, who, of course, will recognize as the Vice President of the Confederacy, because you'll be looking at one of his speeches. The slavery in the Confederate Constitution, first off, note that it has a lot of similarity to the United States Constitution, with probably the biggest thing talking about this idea about Congress not being able to prohibit the introduction of slaves, that they cannot in any way interfere with slaveholding. They go ahead and keep basically the taxation, the 3/5 compromise is the same. They keep the forbidding the international slave trade the same, and that sort of thing. They kind of toughen up the fugitive slave law, but other than that, it's very much the same. That, and of course, you can take your slaves wherever you want. So again, the Constitution of the Confederate States directly addresses that vagueness that we saw in the United States Constitution regarding slavery. The next section is several different diagrams that I found to kind of point out the distribution of wealth in between the South and the North. And of course, you'll have to kind of tilt your head or tilt your device or whatever. But in a nutshell, notice that the North has far more population and has a lot more railways, a lot more manufacturers, a lot more workers, factory workers, and more financial capital. But the only thing that the South has an advantage is the amount of farm acreage, except even the value of their land is less than what they have up North. So I think that's pretty telling. And of course, you have this idea about, how the South and the North are raising funds. Are they printing money? Are they, using kind of taking people's resources? Are they selling bonds? That kind of thing. And you can see the profound difference, right? In the North, you're talking 62% is being raised through the selling of war bonds. The other 20% through a tax. So very little of that is being done through printing of money and through kind of contributions in kind and impressment of resources. In the South, of course, 61% is done through the printing of money, 30% through bonds. So huge difference there. This idea of printing money is going to be a real problem for the South. So keep that in mind when we read Alexander Stevens' speech. Again, just a kind of a different way of looking at the different wealth of the North and the South. And definitely you can see really the only thing that the South has an advantage is large farms. And most of those are producing cotton. And, can you eat cotton? Can you hurt somebody if you throw a cotton bale at them? But the only thing you can do with cotton bales is use them to kind of protect ships, right? There's a famous battle around Galveston that happens in the Civil War where they literally use cotton bales to kind of protect the ship and the sailors from cannons. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And then lastly, of course, a depiction of how the manufactured goods look. The North clearly has far more manufactured goods. These are going to be the things like guns and that sort of thing that allow you to conduct a war. So kind of interesting to compare the two, how different the South is. And I think it kind of teaches you that the South was not nearly as prepared for the war, for this kind of secession. And I think it's an interesting thing to recognize as we move into looking at the inaugural speeches, and kind of why they're doing what they're doing. So I'm going to stop here so I can record a separate one for the inaugural address. So this was pretty short. Yay. All right.